Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? How is dystopia treating you? All great episode today. Great episode. This is Nina Nastasia. If you don't know who Nina is, I'm going to read you her bio right now. Originally from Los Angeles, California, musician Nina Nastasia began writing songs in 1993, but initially had no real ambitions to be a professional musician. She ended up recording many of those songs with Steve Albini, and they became her debut album, Dogs, which was released in 2000. Albini sent the record to John Peel, who championed it on his radio show, and Nina began to garner both fans and acclaim. Since then, she's recorded and released 7 albums on labels like Touch & Go and Fat Cat Records, and her latest project, Jolie Lead, is a collaboration with musician Jeff McLeod, and their self-titled debut album was just released on Oscar Street Records. Highly recommended, folks. Go out and get it. Don't just listen to it on Spotify. Go to Bandcamp. If you have the disposable cash, go purchase physical media. I can't remember when I first heard Nina's music, but I've been a fan for a while, so this was exciting. And whew, Nina has lived a life. We get into her bohemian childhood, let's say, and a lot of other things. I won't spoil it. It always feels weird to say spoil when I'm talking about an interview you're about to hear in about 90 seconds. What I mean is, I want it to unfold in your ears in the same way the discussion unfolded in my ears. So I'll dispense with the description and just say, Nina's great. You're going to enjoy hearing about growing up in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s. By the way, if this is your first episode of Beginnings, what I like to do here in this intro is a little recommended. If you like my talk with Nina, if you're here because you like musicians, maybe you'll like my interviews with other musicians just recently, just in the last couple months. I've talked to Marnie Stern, Will Oldham, Andrew Savage from Parquet Courts, Rod Argent, founder of The Zombies. That was very cool. So if you're so inclined, check out those episodes. If you like them, why not subscribe to the show? I've been doing this for 14 years. Just about. 14 years in January. I've been fudging it these last couple episodes, say 14 years, when really the anniversary is in January, but close enough. And I've done hundreds of interviews with musicians and writers and actors and comedians and journalists. So subscribe, leave a review. You can find me on social media at Andy Beckerman. Coming up, a lot of amazing episodes. I just talked to Evan Dando from the Lemonheads, Tanya Donnelly of Belly. That was great. Jonathan Lethem, one of my favorite writers. So stay tuned for those episodes. But for now, let's talk to Nina.
I grew up Upper Vine Street, Hollywood, then that freeway, and then I was like the first house on the hill after those condominiums. That's what the house I grew up in. But yeah.
Like, wait, where Vine meets like Franklin up there, like past that?
So that you got Franklin, and then you can go on the freeway, right?
Yes.
Or you can go up the hill above the freeway.
Okay, I know that.
And so now, it's a weird. I mean, I've been following this house like every time I come to visit my family, or I look at the house, and it's just changed. It's changed so. It's gone through so many different changes, but now it's really weird. They've closed it off so you can't see the house. There's a big old fence with bushes and everything, and then in front of the bushes, there's all these plastic animals like deer, and it's really weird. It's very weird.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I have a lot of questions, but just to stay
go ahead. We can get going.
To stay with where the house is at the moment.
Okay.
Because when you said fence and everything, I'm like, yes, obviously there's like the gentrifier fence. I get that part.
Yeah.
the plastic animals is the part where the vision in my head falls apart, because it seems
I know. It's weird.
once you have the gentrifier fence up, it seems then you go in this kind of direction where everything is just kind of like some kind of very sterile, not kitschy at all. Like when I think of like the houses that have kind of like weird stuff, like almost like outsider art type things around them, they're always like, the people that live there have lived there for like decades, and they've just like turned it into a kind of
sort of their own little amusement park.
Yeah. So what is the deal with
I don't have to deal with it. I feel as though, I mean, it's kind of weird. It's like, it's sort of nicely done for that kind of, I guess, for that kind of thing. If you're a plastic, and I think it's well, I've got to look again because maybe it's not, but my memory of it is that it's a fairly high-end plastic animal, like, kind of well done deer, like a couple of deers. And I mean, I think maybe they just don't want to be in the city, which I can completely relate to, but maybe they're just, they bought this crazy expensive house and they just would prefer to be in the country. I don't know.
When you were growing up there, did your parents own the house or did they rent it?
They owned it. Yeah, they owned it. And I think it was the first house they owned. And that's where I like grew up. My whole time was in that house. And yeah, it's like an old craftsman house, 1910, I think it was built in.
What is it selling for now? Like $3 million?
Oh, yeah. My dad, bless his heart, was like not, he was not really, I wouldn't say he was very money oriented or smart about any of that kind of thing. I mean, the rest of my family is a lot better in that way, but not, he's not. I probably inherited that from him. Great. But anyway, so he sold it. I think he sold it for $200,000. No, after my mom died, he was like, "Oh, you can live here," because I right after my mom died, I kind of left and I was working when I was 16, so I was just like working, and I guess I moved out like 18, and then he's like, "Well, you can live here," because he got a new wife and moved to Vegas. So I moved in, and then he decided he wanted to sell it, so he sold it, and for what it's going for now, I just want to throw up. Like, that would have been awesome to inherit that, but whatever, whatever.
So, okay. Are they from California, or did they end up here? Were they like hippies that made a trek to the West Coast?
They were not hippies, although, no, my dad was too old to ever be a hippie, I think. But he was, I guess maybe you'd say maybe he's a bohemian, like he's an artist. And he, I think originally like came from New Jersey, lived in New Jersey, he lived in Oregon for a period of time too. I found out later from some article, like I found out after he died, I think that he took a car and just like a van and just drove to Mexico to just check out and like, check out in terms of like not have a real job, just paint, that kind of checkout. And then, but he was an art teacher for my whole life, and a painter, and so yeah, that my my mom's side of the family, my grandmother lived, on Oxford, so down like if you go on Franklin, get to Oxford. She was right up the street there. So on my mom's side. Yeah.
Okay. So Bohemian, was that you also said, I don't know if you said this exactly. You said you didn't say bad with money necessarily, or maybe just didn't think that much about money.
No, so he wasn't savvy with, he wasn't savvy with money in terms of like that. I mean, he was very responsible and really, he was he was not bad with money. Like he was really responsible. He took care of you know, is he took care of the family unit very well, you know, uh and he was yeah, he always was super responsible in terms of always keeping a job and, you know, that kind of thing. He wasn't, yeah, he wasn't bad with, he wasn't irresponsible, kind of in any way, except, you know, even in his drinking, he wasn't really particularly irresponsible, but he drank responsibly a lot. He drank a lot, but he was pretty responsible about it.
Sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Was the plan to be a painter and it didn't work out, or was it just like, I like painting and I'll just do whatever I can to make a living?
Yes. I mean, he was he, I do believe he was like an artist through and through. Like he just, you know, it's funny. He's on the brain a lot because I did wrote this piece. I was asked to write about like role models, and my dad came up in my head because, and so I've sort of thought about it a lot. But he was, he just knew he wanted to paint, and that was all he wanted to do, and he happened to be a really great teacher as well. I mean, it was like he was extremely charismatic, like, so he was a very beloved teacher actually, and he was an incredible artist. Like I I'm not, you know, it's some of his, he did a lot of different kinds of series of paintings, you know, types of paintings, um, figures. He worked with oils and watercolors and charcoal and pen and ink. He'd like worked with a lot of different things. And he did like cartoon illustrations, which I really loved. But he also did, you know, lots of different types of the abstract, figurative, all that stuff. Um, and what's my point? What am I saying to you? What are we talking about?
Role models.
Role models. So, but he just was so committed to doing it and did it every day and was in his studio every day, like working on it. Um, and, you know, I never saw him once bothered by not getting the kind of recognition that you know, I'm sure he wanted. I mean, he showed and he had gallery showings and all that stuff. But you know, his like heroes were Picasso and Hemingway, you know, gives you an idea of who he was. And so he, you know, I'm sure he wanted those accolades. For sure he did. But I never saw any kind of, he did the work because he loved the work, and that was very inspiring. It was good to grow up with that.
Was he explicit about this stuff with you, or is it just things that you've gleaned from watching him?
Oh, it's what I gleaned from watching him. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he might have been miserable, but you know, he was miserable about a lot of things, and I knew that he was miserable about them, and I saw it. So I would imagine I would have seen the other thing about that stuff too, but I never did. He also sort of walked through the world looking at it in the eyes of someone very, very much wanting to observe things and take what he found and turn it into something, his art, you know, whatever. And that was, I'm very grateful for that environment, to have grown up in that environment. My mother was pretty wonderful as well. But she was actually she was an amazing, I thought she was an amazing photographer, but she also did a bunch of other things. But my dad was kind of considered the artist of the family kind of thing. She was a bit of like female supporting of this big person.
Yeah. Was that just because of the era of the 1950s?
You know, I'm sure there's a lot of that. But my mom was she was really sick all her life, very, very sick all her life. And so she was, through my childhood, she was always on the verge of dying, basically.
Oh God.
Yeah, it was a very intense household in that way. Very intense. So, and really why it was just, I'm just an only child, I think, because she wasn't really supposed to have me. So, but she was a force in itself, but she was a very kind of quiet force, you know.
Do you mind if I ask what her diagnosis was?
So funny you ask what it is, because this whole time, like my whole life, it's funny when you grow up, I mean, we can I think everybody grows up in their environment, and if people don't talk to each other about what's going on, there's just no, it's weird, right? How I guess
Mm-hmm.
all families do this, where like somebody's just like, oh yeah, no, and they're not, yeah, he sits in the corner and rocks, but every uncle sits in the corner and rocks. I don't know, but like, I mean, nobody talks about what that person. But so I was, I got it in my head through a doctor kind of explaining things. And I think the explanation was that it it looked a lot like cystic fibrosis. It wasn't. But so the whole time, and I was like thinking it was that. There was another thing that somebody said it was, but I found out recently, just being with my family, we are just going through old photographs and talking about stuff. It was asthma, but she had extreme asthma, and she was on the medication she was on caused her, like her, I guess, um, and her heart was enlarging, the bronchioles were hardening. There was like a lot of complications that came with the asthma, but also came with the medication she was on, and she was on high doses of steroids. So she'd go through, like a cortisone psychosis, which is insane looking. It's insane. It's just, but you go psychotic.
Oh,
Yeah. So there were lots of bouts of that. And at that time, they didn't really know how to deal with the medication, I don't think. So there's like, there's a lot of times doctors were trying to juggle the medications. Yeah.
so you couldn't just have like an inhaler at that time. It was just like,
No, it wasn't as simple. No, I mean, she had inhalers, but it was like it was, I mean, it was an extreme version. It was extreme. It wasn't just, I mean, asthma can be life-threatening and extreme, but hers was like she was fighting to breathe her entire life, like from a child. So she was super smart, and she just like raced through school, and like she kind of didn't have the physical thing strength, but she just sort of kept herself going with them. Her brain was pretty amazing. Yeah, so she was I mean, I guess your podcast is called Beginning, so this is really right. So going through the beginning. But I'm like really, so I realized later like how lucky I am to just actually, because not everybody gets to like their parents or their siblings or anything else, but I really, really liked both those people. I mean, I had issues with my father, but I liked them both quite a bit. They were interesting people.
what were the rhythms of the household like
Yeah,
generally? If she's sick all the time,
the
or she's
rhythm
like,
was insanity. The rhythm was kind of weird because it was like my entire life, got like 18 years of it, and I was super, super close with my mom. So it was a combination of like really fantastic people all the time coming in the house, and there were always artists, and they would bring in like writers and filmmakers and paint, lots of visual painters, and those kind of artists would come to the house, and you know just always was very like alive and vibrant that way. And then the other half was just hell. My mother was either going through like a crazy psychotic break from these medications, where she's talking on the phone and nobody's on the other end, and or she thinks the house is on fire, and she's just like, well, or all, or we have to, like, there's an assassination happening, or like all these crazy kind of things that were hard, to recognize as at first. As a kid, it was hard to really get my head around it as a kid. And then take her to the hospital, going through hospice, she's going to go, all this, it's a constant yo-yo kind of thing. So it was, it was weird. It was kind of weird if I look back on it.
These kind of like cortisone psychotic episodes. Did you know what was going on? Like, were you made aware? Did your dad tell you, or was it just like suddenly she's, worrying about, whatever, Nixon being assassinated? I don't know. But like,
yeah. Well, she'd exaggerate it like your father was going to be assassinated. Like that was the kind of exaggeration kind of thing. I don't think she gave a shit about Nixon, but she, it was, it's funny. It was like, I don't remember anybody really talking to me about it until I got kind of older. And then I kind of understood that it was because of the medications. But the weird thing is that she would, when we would bring her to the hospital, it's almost like nobody really knew what was going on. And even the doctors didn't really know how to juggle the medications. I don't know what was going on with that, but it was weird. So there was a lot of time where she'd be in the hospital and people didn't know whether to put her in a psych ward, or so it was confusing in that way. And then part of my thoughts were kind of like, well, is this because of her capacity to be like, is she kind of psychotic and this is kicking it in, or like what's going on? But it was, I mean, definitely was from the medication, but it looked so extreme that it was really odd. But I kind of learned to adapt to it in that I kind of learned that if one of the things she would do sometimes when it would start was she would just start naming things in the room. And I kind of got the sense that, oh, she must be trying to kind of keep grounded by just like going, like water bottle, picture, lamp, and it sounds weird, but so, and there would be times like she would, I was one time sitting with her and she just said, she told me to do all these things that were weird, like, put this marble underneath the thing, and I would just sort of do it to kind of keep her somehow grounded for this time until people would figure out like how to put her back. But she was so, it was clear that once something was sorted, she was back to normal.
I get, by the way, when I'm really tired, but I have to drive somewhere anyway, I will out loud say, that's a green light. So that I'm like, all right, really you've said it out loud, so it's real. So that you can keep going.
I have to do it just if the freeways here in Los Angeles suck. Oh my God, people are maniacs. And I really hate driving on the freeways here. But so I do that anyway.
I mean, was it like when you were growing up? Like, it's this town. It seems particularly. We're from the East Coast. My wife's from New York. I lived in New York for a long time before we moved here. It feels like the worst part of the suburbs and the worst part of the city put together. But I have to imagine that's like new. Was it like that growing up?
Oh my God. Do you need to move back to the East Coast?
Desperately, we would. The minute we moved here, we're like, we wanted to, but all the work is here.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. Like when I moved out of Los Angeles, I think when I was, I can't remember dates at all, but I think I was about 22 or something like that. I hated it. I hated it because it felt so desperate. Like everyone had, it's a movie industry town, so everybody had to have a picture and resume, and everywhere you went, it was like somebody, I think there was a a friend of mine threw me like a goodbye party, and I was like, yeah, this is perfect. Like, I don't know half the people here. It's just dumb. You know what I mean? Like, there was that kind of thing. I was like, what is this? This is just dumb. But so I didn't like that aspect of it. Um it just felt desperate, but it's also like I might have been always terrified of like an earthquake happening, or you can't run away from that, but I was pretty terrified of that. And I was just like, something's going to happen at this place. This is just a mess. But so it might have been a combination also of just me needing to move like get out of my hometown, try something else. So it might have been a kind of desperation to get out for that reason. But the funny thing is, so I eventually got to New York and stayed there for a long time. New York is, I always really, really liked the East Coast.
But when you were growing up here in Los Angeles, in Hollywood specifically, I think about that time because you're a teenager in, late 70s, early 80s, right? The 60s has curdled. You had Manson. You had like the Night Stalker, I guess. Didn't that happen in the 70s?
Terrifying. I mean, yeah, 70s are terrifying. And all that stuff. And something about those tripped out desert West Coast people are scary. I don't know. Like, yeah. I mean, I still get freaked out. I get freaked out by Los Angeles just for the whole, I grew up with a whole fear of the gang situation too. I mean, it's like,
Okay, so is that the vibe in general? Is fear? Is like, you have like you're either serial killers or you have some kind of gang violence that you're thinking about?
Yes. So I think growing up in that, yes, I was always a little bit worried. There was some weird shit that happened at that house. I mean, it was before my memory of it, but I was told about it, and it's like, I guess there was a copycat Manson that came to our house and like wrote pigs and all that stuff. They did the whole thing.
Wait, on the house that you grew up in?
Yeah, but it was like a copycat thing, and it was quite tame. I mean, they just paint with red paint, and they did that, and then they took all the canned goods, and then they left. Like, it was something, but terrifying. And there, we were right. It was right at that Hollywood foothills where it's super nice, but you're still right in the muck of the city where it gets kind of, I think Argyle would get a little bit dangerous in that area, and so you had helicopters circling, right? There was one time there were some armed robbers was on the loose, and then some like cops were coming in. We were just actually, as a family, we were talking about it because we were all sitting at the dining room table, and then all of a sudden there's this banging on the back door, and it was like some guy trying to get in, and then the cops saying, "Don't open your doors," because some guy's on the loose, and that kind of thing. I don't know.
You said that kind of thing as if I have ever experienced just like a maniac banging on my door.
Oh, I experienced it actually when I moved out of the house, and I had an apartment on, where was it? Orange Grove or something. I don't know where it was, but it was in that, area. And we just moved in, and it was like a duplex kind of thing. And I was on the top floor, and, it's all exciting, the new place. And I could just moved stuff in, and there's banging on the glass door. There's like a glass door, and then stairs, and then like another glass door, not very secure, but banging, banging, banging. And we're looking out the window, and it's some guy we don't recognize, and he's just yelling and trying to get in. And so we called the cops. We're like, there's somebody banging on the door. And they're like, okay, well, where is he now? And we're like, oh, he's smashing the door. And he's running up the stairs. So we drop the phone, run. It was like one of those long apartments, like where it's almost like a railroad kind of a thing. And then there was like a back door, and it went into like a little yard, and then, a gate. And I was the first out of there, ran down the stairs, jumped the fence, which quite frankly, I didn't know I had it in me to actually. I've never been good at gymnastics, but that was like kind of a move. It was a move. I was just like, took it, went over the thing. And when the cops got there, so the guy had like, nobody else jumped the fence. I was the only one. And everybody else, and the guy was, if you can see, the guy was here and everybody else was up against the fence there. And so there were about 5 of us in the house. And I told told the cops where to go. And as soon as the guys saw the cops, they were like, "Thank God, these people are in my house." Like, oh. So he was a bit whacked out. Actually.
Yeah. Okay. So what? In general, okay. So you have like the kind of like the curdled '60s that have the overhang, the hangover of that into the '70s. There's also, in my mind, there's all these like overlapping, I guess we'll call them vibes. You know, in my mind, you also have New Hollywood, I suppose. You have, you know, the way it's depicted in Annie Hall or Albert Brooks's Modern Romance. You've got, I guess, the music scene, like the Fleetwood Mackie kind of, I don't know, Mulholland Drive or Laurel Canyon type stuff going on. And I'm kind of curious how, outside of the curdled '60s, was that all that other stuff a reality, or is that just what culture now has picked out to tell me that the '70s in Los Angeles were like? Or could you feel all that other stuff at the time too?
Well, I mean, you know, my household growing up was a kind of world in itself, and it was so overwhelming that I didn't get a chance to really peek outside of that and really observe pop culture and all the stuff that was going on around me. I was really stuck in a ball, a whirlwind of that thing. But in our house was like, I mean, what happened in our house does kind of sound like what you're describing. You know, I mean, there was some wild individuals that would come there that would had like these alternative lifestyles. Like there was the Baron, who had like long beard and big long hair, and he would look for gold in Honduras and then Bigfoot in Northern California. That was his thing. And he came in and would just tell stories about, you know, and my dad was like, "Well, what are you going to do when you find the Bigfoot?" Like, it's like, I don't know. He was a very interesting character that in my memory of him, it seemed like he really checked out of, you know, the kind of normal, I don't know what he was. Yeah, it was a different alternative lifestyle he was leading. And then there was some, you know, there was some kind of like real kind of hippie artists who would come and like, you know, I remember smelling weed for the first time, asking my mom what that smell is. And she goes, "It's tea." I don't know why she said tea. Like, why would tea doesn't even smell? I was like, oh, okay, they're drinking some weird tea. Like, but there was a lot of patchouli, people wearing a lot of patchouli at some point, and you know, so there's a lot of naked people because of well, like the models would get, so my dad would have classes, or there would be like, you know, there was this one woman, Frances, who she had like really big hats, and she was quite rotund, and she was like, my dad loved drawing her. It was like, so he did a whole Frances series. So I love that series actually. And she had, like, I recently wrote about it, but so she looked kind of like a Mae West character. I mean, that's kind of like what she looked like. And I'd come home from school and like try on her hats, and my dad would be, you know, sitting on the toilet drawing, and she'd be in the tub, you know, with the like lingerie, like, big hats. You know, like he would just be drawing her. So it happened all the time. So it was a very kind of colorful world that I guess reflected. And then there was the kind of scary, weird shit that would happen in there, you know, with, yeah, like I feel like I always had the kind of fear of people breaking in because I think there was a period of time where people did break in and they would just take canned goods. They would break in and take canned goods and then leave. So I don't know. That seems very 70s to me. I don't know. But um there wasn't like really secure locks on the door in any of the doors, and that always freaked me out. There was like
Yeah.
I mean, I was always nervous in that house because uh it's yeah, it's funny. I mean, there was like it was a weird combination of sheer joy and excitement about what's going on to like fear of somebody breaking in or some psychotic episode or something. I mean, there's like
Right.
a lot in that one
Right.
household.
Someone stealing your Campbell soup.
Yeah, somebody steal your Campbell soup, which is so annoying.
Were
There was a
you
guy that was lurking outside the window, and I went to get some water. And you know how that whole thing is you turn the light on, you get some water, and then you go and you turn the light out, and you look, and there's some guy standing that kind of thing.
one of those things would have made me nervous the rest of my childhood. A single one, let alone it happening constantly. And I'm wondering, were you self-aware that like, hey, this is maybe a little atypical what's happening in my household? Or was it like, well, this is just the world?
I think it was because it was such a constant. I think I did really feel like that. Well, this is the world. And then, my dad had like his best friend actually lived in San Francisco, and we'd go visit him. And he and his wife lived in this old Victorian house. It was amazing. And he had two children, and they were always naked. So I was like, and we were teenagers, and I was just like, felt really weird wearing clothes. So eventually, like, all the kids I mean, they were just in this sort of hippie, and they were real hippies, actually. So I think, they went off to like a commune at some point, or did some crazy stuff that the kids ended up being like, but, so I just, yeah, so it was kind of like reinforcement that this is just how things are. But then I kind of grew up going, oh yeah, that's unusual. I think the sickness of my mom was one of those things where I knew pretty quickly that was unusual and extremely hard, and not everybody is going through this serious pain, like because it was I was so close to her. It was very, very difficult. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds it. And what I'm wondering, I guess, then is like, do you grow up in such a way like, all right, there are all these people. Okay, there's in my mind, you can go two directions. You can be like, well, I'm comfortable. There's people naked all around, all this stuff. I can be comfortable. I don't just mean like in nudity, but like I can be comfortable in myself, right?
Yeah.
Or you can be like with me, whenever I was pretty repressed. So like whenever there was anything that was like any kind, like outside of the norm, it made me feel pretty weird as a kid. And I didn't have the language to articulate why it was weird. I just knew to like I had a gut instinct to like push away from whatever that was.
Yeah.
So how did it affect you, I guess, on that spectrum that I've created?
Yeah. So for whatever reason, I had a really difficult time being good with who I was. I never felt quite good enough, any of it, smart enough, pretty enough, fat enough, skinny enough, whatever, that kind of thing. And so that was a big burden. And I don't know. And I had a funny combination of, where does that come from? I mean, it's like, I guess your relationship with your parents, but, to my mother, I was like this miracle child that could kind of, every little thing I did was just amazing. And, and then my dad was more of this unattainable person that was always like, no matter what I did. It was like I did it when I was, 3 years younger than you, like, whatever it was, it's
Why
like
is he
there was,
competing with his daughter? What?
yeah, it was weird. And so he, I mean, he loved me, but he just he didn't have a good education of, from his parents of like how to sort of deal with things.
And
And know what
his
to do with the daughter.
heroes
He really didn't know what to do with the daughter, but
and
so
his heroes had such a good relationship with women, Picasso and
yeah,
Hemingway,
exactly.
such healthy relationships with women. So I'm sure that
Picasso was the same. I mean, really, it was like, yeah, it was very telling. But yeah, so it was like I think I didn't have a good self-esteem was pretty, and so and I was like I was having there wasn't a lot of room to kind of you know have like a growing up and finding yourself and this like really loving, I had a loving environment, but not,
uh-huh.
so there were all these sort of expectations and uh I don't know. I remember really like crying myself to sleep wanting to be a different person, like just wanting to be a different person. And then I think of, it's funny because I mean, I have been kind of thinking about this stuff a little bit because I fell into that in my relationship with my partner who they died by suicide. I have to remember to say died by suicide and not, I understand why people say that. Died by suicide. Um, and the relationship was, there was a lot of abuse, and so I fell into that whole thing of like not feeling enough or who I. So at a very old age for this, I'm finally going, oh yeah, I'm fine, like, I'm me, or I'll figure out who that even is. It's weird. It's weird.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
well,
jumping a little bit. My dog's barking like crazy, but
I have to imagine it's really difficult with your parents taking up so much space when you were younger.
oh
That'd be
yeah.
really difficult to figure out who you
Yeah,
are.
and it was weird because it was like, it was a weird combination of you're taking up too much space, or uh or you're not taking advantage of your space or whatever, you know what I mean? It was like I had to, yeah. It was weird. It was weird.
Well, then how do you discover what you want to do in this context where you are not given a lot of space, where like I'm assuming that you're reacting a lot to like what they're doing
Yeah.
as opposed to being able to sit and
Yeah.
think about your own self or your future or what you want?
Yeah. So it was quite difficult. I mean, my when my mom finally died, she asked me when I was 18. She was in the hospital and she asked me if she could die. And I was just like, well, yes, because of, I'll be okay, because she
Mm-hmm.
was beaten, like beaten. She was ready to go. And and then she died. And then I was like, why the fuck did I say it was okay? Like, because I didn't want her to die. So I had a really hard time with that. And I think I was just kind of lost. I always had art as an outlet. Like I loved doing it and I would always do it. Like I would always paint or write, or never, not really music so much, but just painting and writing. And then, you know, kind of floating around, not really, not really having a direction, not knowing what I wanted to be, not even knowing how to even get to that place of being. I just was kind of floating around. And then when I got to New York, I was in Seattle for a year and I started writing songs then and
Do you
playing,
mind if I ask what brought you to New York from Seattle?
oh, what brought, um, a guy, a guy was like, hey, you want to, I'm moving there. You want to go? It's like, sure. And, and I went and it was the most, like I had no directions. So it's kind of like, yeah, I'll go there. Never saw the place ever except in Woody Allen movies. And I get there and I was like, oh, this is scary. This is big,
Yeah, New York of the 80s, the pre-Giuliani New York of the 1980s. Yeah.
So I was like, I landed in this apartment that was like on 14th Street in like East Village. And I was just like, I would make myself go get coffee across the street at a bodega and run back. It took me a while to get comfortable, but then I ran into some, I started getting a life there. I had jobs and stuff and meeting people, and I was playing guitar. I had my like little really shitty guitar, and then a friend of mine who was doing music. He had some endorsement. He had an endorsement with Taylor Guitars, and he was like, "You should really do this, like, and you should have a guitar that really actually plays because you'll play better with a good guitar." And he's like, "And I've got many, so here." So he gave me my Taylor guitar, and then I started just kind of like writing and playing music, and then like sharing it with some people, and then people would just sort of push me in different directions, like, oh, you should play with this person, and I'd meet people and play a little bit and then I started to play shows with, and it was really exciting. And then I met this person, Kenan, and he was seriously ambitious, and he just sort of had a real vision, and then yeah, and that's how it kind of started. But I never really even felt ambitious about it. It was a real problem in our situation because I really didn't have ambition. I just was like just sort of going with the flow. And now is the first time I feel kind of ambitious about it, like, I'm actually doing things to try to keep doing it, so it's a serious late bloomer.
Yeah.
I am, like, I feel 18, but it's like really, that's really hard. But
If you didn't have like career ambitions, did you have some kind of artistic ambition?
yes, I mean, I've always had that. Like that it's the art was driven by kind of trying to create something where I can go, hey, I'm worth something, like there's a bit of that for sure. There is a bit of like just trying to kind of put whatever, and it's usually painful things, but put it into something that is I can deal with in a better, create it. Yeah, just a way of kind of getting through a bad situation or whatever. And now it's definitely been about a real, especially since this whole situation I had with this person for like 26 years, or maybe even 27. And then the suicide, it was like, it's a continuation of really trying to get something so horrible and making it and putting it making it beautiful or whatever, or just just the trying to, it just like, I guess it can make you get out of it, and all of a sudden you're dealing with a puzzle piece and not this hideous, I'm dealing with wrapping my head around somebody that probably had borderline personality disorder and all these things, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So. Yeah, no, I get that. It's what was it about music that appealed to you as a way to, I'm saying like at the beginning, like back at, you could have wanted to paint, you could have wanted to like process some of the stuff like with your mom or with your dad or whatever, right? Through painting. You could have, you said you were writing before that. What was it about music where it felt better or it felt right, or maybe I'm putting these words on you, that it felt better to express the stuff through music.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing, I don't know if it feels better actually, because a lot of times, like I would just be floating around, and if somebody was doing something, for example, like floating around in my dad's painting, I was like, "Ooh, I want to do that. That looks fun." You know what I mean? And so I'll just like dive into that for a while, or somebody. I mean, that's still the case. Like somebody's doing something, I'm like, "Oh, that looks fun. Let me try see if I can do something like that." I mean, it's a lot of that, and then the music ended up. There was something about the music that felt like um I don't know, it felt quite natural, for me to do music. Maybe more, I don't know if it's that I just ended up having to spend more time. I just ended up spending more time in the music, but something about it seems like yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is, because there's certainly other things I would love to maybe do um and try. Uh but this feels like, I don't know, maybe feels it's sort of safe in a way. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Yeah. Sure. I mean, when you had such a kind of, let's say, just chaotic childhood, right? And then you have a kind of chaotic partner for a couple decades, right? I assume you would want to have some kind of, I'm going to say refuge. That's not really what I mean, but some kind of, your artistic, you want some safety in your artistic pursuit. You want
Yeah,
something
I
that,
didn't think about that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, maybe.
yeah. Cause it just seems to me that like, okay, here's another thing too. I was wondering, like, do you like making decisions? Making decisions, does it feel bad? And I'm going somewhere with this.
Yeah, yeah. Like like artistic
Any kind of decisions, but like, but
oh
yes,
yeah.
also artistic decisions
The
too.
funny thing is that I think, before Canon, I was making a bunch of decisions and getting somewhere in that I was kind of building building a life. I mean, I'm much more practical person, let's say, than Kenan was. He took a lot of risks, which were some things were amazing, some things were just disastrous. Like it definitely puts you in financial ruin kind of thing. But um but I was making these decisions, and then I was kind of coming into my own, and then I met him, and it's almost like I just fell into this, oh, like it his his type of how he controlled things, and it fed into all my, and what it would sort of say to me about myself fed into all the things that I got, all my insecurities. So I started to just sort of believe it, and then just sort of turned into a shell, which is, it's a I'm still trying to get my head around the whole that whole aspect, which through the last record I did, I had decided to be kind of vocal about it, but I really don't have any wisdom about it, because I feel like it's an important thing to talk about, but I don't really have any wisdom about force and control or any of that stuff. It's just crazy. And he wasn't an evil person. He was just a seriously troubled person and all that stuff. And I'm going off on a tangent and forgetting what we were talking about, but what were we talking about? Oh, so the decisions. So it's weird to have been in this like hibernation state, or like not doing, like a shell. And then the terrible thing when he died, it was horrible, horrible, horrible. But the freedom that happened,
Yeah.
artistic freedom, all sorts of freedoms. And I jumped really quickly, I think, back into being myself. And part of it was like, well, I don't have time. I don't have any time. And that's the thing. Like what happened was I ended up telling him that we needed to, I woke up one finally woke up and was like, if I don't get out of this now, this is it. This is my life, and this is over. It's it. It's going to go worse. Just going to go worse. And so when I made that decision, the worst happened, like within less than 24 hours, he committed suicide. And then so, um, but I think because I'm, probably being the age I am, I'm just like, I fucking don't have time to sit around. I mean, I need to start making decisions, my own decisions, and quick, so I think I jump back into, I surprise myself a lot of times because I'm just like, oh, yeah, I can do this. I can do this.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask, just in both stages, right? Both where your parents are taking up a lot of space and where your partner is taking up a lot of space. Do you kind of already have an idea of who you are, and then it's just you're not being allowed to express that because there's so much other stuff going on? And then once, either you leave the house or your partner dies, right? It's like the way you described it made it sound like you kind of knew who you were on some level, and that it was just allowed to you were allowed to be yourself then.
I must have. I mean, it's a lot of, insecurities and stuff. But I mean, this this past couple of years has been really about kind of going, proving to myself, oh yeah, I can do this, I can do it. And also I'm just, I think the biggest thing is that it sucks failing, but I just don't give a shit. It's like, we all do it.
Yeah.
And it's silly to even try to, can't avoid it. I mean, there's no perfect. And I guess I'm just thinking it's just like a huge weight is lifted to be like, I'm just not going to pretend to anybody. I'm just going to be real.
Yeah.
And it comes off stupid. It comes off stupid. Fuck it.
Yeah. No, I get it.
I've like kind of made a point of just, I'm who I am. I'm going to be direct with whatever it is. And that's it. It's like, I'm not going to hide because it takes a lot of work. And I think during that, with Kenan, I was so nervous because I was so afraid to break a dish, and I was constantly breaking dishes, it's like, and having to hide it, I mean, doing an interview was petrifying. I was like, I had a phobia of doing interviews, and I would have to do during the, before I went on hiatus, like I would do interviews, like radio interviews, and I would just shake my head and nod my head as answers. And they would be like, okay.
Oh,
like I was so terrified. I couldn't even say my name because I thought it would come out stupid, Oh, it's a terrible way to be.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Okay. Final question then.
Yeah.
How do you think, maybe this is unanswerable. Sorry, I was in my head. I was just like, if someone asked me what I'm about to ask you, I don't know how to answer it, but
okay.
We'll see what happens. How do you think your relationship or the way you create has changed throughout this whole, from when you were a teenager, in your home, through then having some freedom and then kind of falling back into your home life from your childhood in some way, right? Mm-hmm. And then now in this new kind of stage, how do you think that's changed?
Well, I can tell you how it's changed. I don't know how it's changed from being as a kid, because I think probably as a kid, I was a lot more open and unafraid. I think I could tell you from my time with Kenan, and it's a funny thing because I learned an enormous amount from him. He was a remarkable individual. I mean, like super talented, in a lot of aspects, very creative person, and understood really had a really good understanding of the workings of things, like what makes something not like very good with poetry, like what makes something actually work, when is it good vague, when and why. And so he had a really good understanding of that stuff that I learned a lot from. But I think he was striving to be perfect, and it destroyed him. I mean, he couldn't do anything on this. He was always stopping himself. And I felt very caged, like collaborating was not, it was like everything was so strict and had to be perfect. And it's impossible. First of all, it doesn't exist in art anyway, like nothing's perfect. And so, now the difference is that it is really the difference of just not, and I always had this, and I think that this is great now that I can act on it, because I've always felt like, well, there is no perfect. You got people that think you're a genius, people think you're an idiot. Like it's going to always be pretty much that, somebody said something to me like Mozart was a hack. I was like, oh, okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like somebody's got their opinion. And so it's really the important thing is to just, obviously I want to try to get better and better as whatever I'm doing. I want to learn from it, but you can't learn unless you really give yourself over to another person in a collaboration, or take the chance to fail at it, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Definitely that's the difference between now and those decades before.
Wow. Nina, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for talking with me. This was such a delight to meet you, to chat with you.
Oh, it was really fun. Yeah. And we're practically neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just, 3 hours in traffic away, even though we're
right,
a mile and a half.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Well, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to have done it.
Of course. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.